confrontation needed, Lee found her spare closet reorganized while she and her husband were on a 4-day trip they told exactly one person about. Nobody had broken in. Nothing was stolen. Everything was simply different. The first time it happened, 8 months into living in the house she and Daniel had bought together, Lee assumed she was misremembering. She came home from a work trip to find the pantry rearranged, cans grouped by category instead of how she'd always kept them, spices alphabetized in a way she'd never once bothered to do herself. "Did you do this?" she asked Daniel, half laughing, genuinely more confused than concerned. "Do what?" He glanced at the pantry, shrugged. "Looks the same to me." It didn't look the same to Lee, but she let it go, filing it under the small, forgettable mysteries every household seems to accumulate. It happened again 3 months later, laundry folded and put away while they were both at work, a load Lee distinctly remembered leaving in the dryer that morning. Then again around the holidays, a box of Christmas decorations moved from the garage to the hall closet, sorted by color, a task Lee had been meaning to get to for 2 years and never had. Each time, small, deniable, almost helpful each time, easy to dismiss as her own forgetfulness, or Daniel quietly doing something thoughtful without mentioning it. It was the closet that finally made Lee stop dismissing it. She and Daniel had gone away for a long weekend, told only Daniel's mother, Carol, the exact dates, mostly out of courtesy, so Carol would know when to expect them back for a family dinner already scheduled the following week. Nobody else had those specific dates. Not Lee's own parents, not her sister, not a single friend. They came home to find the spare closet, the one Lee used for out-of-season clothes and boxes she hadn't fully unpacked since the move, completely reorganized. Boxes labeled in handwriting that wasn't hers or Daniel's. A few items she didn't recognize at all, tucked neatly onto a shelf, as though someone had been quietly adding to the space rather than simply tidying it. Lee stood in the doorway for a long moment, a cold, precise feeling settling into her chest. "Daniel," she said carefully. "Does your mother have a key to our house?" Daniel's hesitation answered the question before he did. "She helped us move in. I think she might still have the one from that weekend. I never really thought about it. She's been in here while we were gone. She's been in here other times too, I think." "I'm sure it's nothing," Daniel said, in the particular tone Lee had come to recognize over 3 years of marriage, the tone he used whenever anything involving his mother required him to choose a side he didn't want to choose. "She probably just wanted to help. You know how she is." Lee did know how Carol was, warm, endlessly generous, always somehow present at exactly the moments Lee wanted privacy most, always framing every boundary Lee tried to set as an unnecessary hurt feeling rather than a reasonable request. "I'm not comfortable with her having a key," Lee said. "I need you to ask for it back." Daniel agreed, the way he always agreed to things involving his mother, sincerely, and then somehow never quite following through. A phone call postponed, a conversation that kept finding a more convenient time to happen next week instead. 3 weeks passed. The key was never mentioned again, and neither was asked for. Lee decided, quietly, to test something instead of asking a second time. She told Daniel about an upcoming work trip, 3 days, a real one, dates and flight numbers she showed him directly. She told her own sister the same real dates. And she told Carol, in a casual phone call, entirely different dates, a full week later than the actual trip, framed as an offhand mention rather than an announcement. If Carol had a key and used it independently of what Daniel knew, the house would show it on the wrong week entirely. A week when, according to what Carol believed, Lee and Daniel would still be gone. Lee installed a small, inexpensive camera inside the hall closet before she left, angled toward the interior of the house, unremarkable, easy to miss unless you knew exactly where to look. She left for her actual trip on the real dates. She came home on the real dates too, the house undisturbed, nothing moved, because Carol believed, according to the false information Lee had given her, that the house was still supposed to be empty for another full week. Then Lee waited. 6 days later. Squarely inside the window, Carol believed the house was empty. The camera recorded Carol letting herself in with her own key, moving through the house with the calm, practiced familiarity of someone who'd done this many times before, spending nearly 90 minutes reorganizing the pantry, refolding towels in the hall closet, and finally, standing for a long moment in the nursery. Lee and Daniel had only just begun setting up for a pregnancy they hadn't told Carol about yet, touching the crib, adjusting a mobile that hadn't been adjusted, straightening things that hadn't needed straightening. In a room she had no business being in at all. Lee watched the footage alone first, twice, feeling something shift permanently in her understanding of the woman who'd smiled warmly at her across every family dinner for 3 years. She didn't confront Carol directly. She'd learned enough about how Carol operated to know that a direct accusation would produce only tears, wounded confusion, an elaborate story about simply wanting to help her son's household run smoothly. Instead, Lee showed the footage to Daniel, alone, without commentary, and let him watch his mother move through their unborn child's nursery in silence. Daniel didn't defend her this time. He sat very still for a long moment, then said quietly, "I didn't know it was this bad." That week, Daniel changed the locks himself, without telling his mother in advance, and mailed her a single new key only after Lee agreed, a spare, clearly labeled, to be used solely if explicitly invited for a specific occasion, never for unsupervised access again. Carol called 11 times over the following week. Lee let Daniel handle those calls entirely, staying out of the conversation completely, watching him hold a boundary with his own mother for what both of them quietly understood was the first time in his adult life. Carol never fully understood why the locks had changed. She offered explanation after explanation. She'd only ever wanted to help. She didn't understand why something so small had become such a big deal. She felt hurt, genuinely hurt, that her own son would treat her like a stranger in a house she'd helped him move into. Daniel didn't argue with any of it. He simply repeated the same calm, unchanging line every time. "You're welcome here when we invite you, not before." Lee never showed Carol the footage. She never needed Carol to admit what she'd done, never needed a confrontation or an apology that would have arrived. She suspected, wrapped in exactly as much charm and reasonable-sounding explanation as everything else Carol had ever said. She simply changed the locks and let the silence around the reason speak for itself. Their daughter was born 5 months later. Carol visits now, warmly, generously, exactly as present as she's always wanted to be, but always by invitation, always with advance notice, always through a door that opens only from the inside.